On the channel, we have already had different experiences where very particular situations occur with people who awaken an extremely curious mystery. They usually appear in delicate moments of distress or, why not, danger, and for some reason they are of help to those who experience this encounter. Some believe they are angels, while others believe they are simply people with great empathy for others, providing all that support at the exact moment they need it. Today you are going to hear two stories that deserve to be analyzed and that I assure you will leave you thinking. I also leave you in the pinned comment some other stories on this same theme that are really unmissable. Friends, don't forget to subscribe and take a spin if you haven't done so yet on my secondary channel. Remember that every Sunday we have a new case. Now welcome to a new video. Let's get started. I want to tell you what happened to me a few years ago. It was perhaps where I became aware of something that, although you hear about it every now and then, you don't take into account until you experience it personally. The interesting thing about this was also having gone through it with another person who witnessed every second of everything that happened. My mother lives in the North Zone, in the city of Victoria, and that 2017, like so many other times, we went with my son to visit her. We live about 50 kilometers away, more precisely in Temperley, so we have almost an hour's journey, depending obviously on the traffic, of course. Anyway, all of this doesn't have much to do with what actually happened. The thing was that we left around 6 in the evening. It was winter, so it was practically night. In our car, a Peugeot 207. We never imagined that that night would be quite different. The route we take is relatively simple. Almost entirely. I could tell you that it is by general paths. That time, after a while of leaving, and without any problem, it was the weekend, so there was very little traffic on the street. Something happened to us. Something that, as I told you, would change many ideas that until that moment we looked at with some distrust. Upon reaching the roundabout at Puente La Noria and being very close to the bridge, the car threw a mechanical fault on the dashboard and stopped, making a pretty ugly noise. So we ended up with the car stopped on the right side and not knowing what to do. We got out, opened the hood, and checked the engine together to try to figure out what had happened. It turned out that we had cut the timing belt or distribution belt, so the problem was very serious. We knew we weren't going to be able to fix this quickly, but the worry I had at that moment was different. It wasn't about the car, it was about the area where we were stranded. We were alone in a place where anyone who knows this site a little agrees that it is not exactly a safe area, and we were totally exposed to any danger.
Without wanting to alarm my son because he is a good boy, very young, my feeling was, oh, here we are in the worst place to stay. This is very dangerous because a lot of people pass by. There are two very large places there where there is danger and there are miscreants nearby, and it was a very dangerous place to stay because anyone who wanted to stop and rob us or whatever, we were completely defenseless. And when we called the tow truck, we knew that we were going to be there waiting for at least 2 hours. While I was thinking that, I see a white car stop, a Ford Focus, and I already thought it was what I thought, let's say, someone who was coming for us.
A man who caught my attention got out of this car right away. He was quite tall, I would say about 6 feet 1, 6 feet 3 or so, with very intense blue eyes and dressed in white. He was wearing white pants and shirt and he was bald. Anyway, this description is not something that is out of the realm of possibilities, but I can assure you that it struck me to see him for some reason. I didn't realize it then, but I would later understand everything. This gentleman got out of the car, approached us, greeting with a very warm smile. And the first thing he tells me is, "You are having a problem, isn't it true?" I answered yes, because we had cut the belt and we didn't know what to do because the tow truck would take a long time. Almost without giving me time to continue talking, he even interrupted me He said, "In the trunk, you have a sling. Take it out and bring it, please." The sling, for those who don't know, is basically a tape to be able to hook both cars and be able to tow it in a comfortable way. I'm totally honest with you, I wasn't sure I had it in the trunk, but when I checked, it was indeed there. It was a yellow sling that I had never used before. I took it out and we hooked up the cars. This man told us to stay calm, that he would get us out of there, but he didn't know where to take us. The first thing that came to my mind was the McDonald's on General Pass and Alverde Avenue. This is a few bridges further ahead, and it was a fairly safe place, at least, to be able to call and wait for the tow truck. And that's where we went. On the way, while this man was towing us, my son and I talked about how incredible everything that was happening was. And we agreed that there are still good people in this world, something that one rarely finds lately. Minutes later, we arrived at our destination. We got out of the car to unhook them. This gentleman also gets out and helps us. And at that moment, the strangest thing I could have imagined happened. I shook his hand, thanking him profusely for the help he gave us, and at the same time I asked him his name. To which he responds something incredible. Looking at me very intently with those blue eyes I told you about, he tells me I don't have a name. I immediately laughed, thinking it was a simple joke, and told him that I would really like to know the name of the person who had helped us in that ugly moment we were going through with the car. He looks at me again and tells me he doesn't have a name, and not to worry about that. I asked him again, thanking him over and over, but it was no use. He just told me that I didn't have to thank him. And the important thing is that we were okay. This guy turned around, got in the car and left.
He turns around, it even seemed a bit strange and rude to me, gets in the car and leaves. And my son and I were left thinking, what a strange guy, right? Over time, we realized that in reality, he wasn't a strange person, but that this very neat and special person was an angel, and that they had sent him to us because we were in a real danger situation.
What happened to me that August was the most intense thing I've ever experienced in my life. And while I had a witness to all of this that happened, he never knew what was hidden behind what we lived that night. Downtown Federal Capital. I prefer to keep my name confidential and my partner's as well to avoid any kind of problem, since even though I am not currently working in the force, my friend is, and I wouldn't want to harm him. Working for the Argentine Federal Police, I've been through many places, very ugly situations. I've met people who are worth their weight in gold, and people who don't even deserve to be remembered, but this has nothing to do with what happened to me. Before I fully delve into the experience of that particular night, I have to briefly tell about a personal situation that my family and I were going through at that time. Something very intimate that only a few knew about and that indirectly related to what I experienced that night. My cousin was going through a very tough, very delicate time because of his addiction. We were always very close since childhood, growing up together like brothers rather than cousins. For this reason, it was precisely me who was trying to pull him out of all that darkness that surrounded him, from that pit he was in. But no matter how much I tried, it was a cold shower to find out in early August of that same year that he had been hospitalized due to a strong overdose. Returning to the initial topic, one night, days after his hospitalization while we were patrolling, something happened to us worthy of a movie. It would be past midnight in barracks, and it was when we were on Branson Street, passing between what would be the Borda Neuropsychiatric Hospital and Moyano, that we saw on the side, against one of the walls, a woman who was screaming. My partner stops the car and we get out to help her. At that moment, the first thing we said was that she had escaped from the hospital, although later we would find out the truth. The thing was that we got out of the car, we left the patrol car about 20 meters away, and as we approached, this woman completely fell down. When we stood in front of her, she was a lady of about 50 years old, quite dirty, and she looked at us, she stared at us, first at one and then at the other, without saying anything. We introduced ourselves and asked what was happening, but she didn't respond, only looking at us.
Looked at one of us.
At a time. My partner was the one who looked at me and said, This one escaped from the Molano, there's no doubt. Wait, I'm going to the entrance and I'll let them know. He walked away, and meanwhile I stayed with this woman. 2 situations occurred there. First was that while we were alone, she spoke to me. She whispered something I couldn't hear, but later repeated it when I asked, saying it all at once. A sentence that shocks me just to recall it. She's leaving. Don't go out tomorrow. And at that moment, I got a headache that I can't explain to you. I asked him to repeat this to me, because beyond having heard it, I didn't understand what he was referring to. But that was the only thing he said, and then again he started screaming like when we had seen him. My partner arrived, and it finally turned out not to be a woman who had escaped from Moyano or Borda. The woman appeared to reside on the street. What we did then was call an ambulance to attend to her, and we continued our route. The second time we passed by there, she was no longer there, so we assumed that she had been taken for medical attention, fortunately. The night continued, but the most traumatic was yet to come. I was called just before my shift ended. It was my wife who told me that my cousin had died. Do you know what time? Around 1 in the morning approximately. And it was very curious to remember at that exact moment that just minutes before that time, we had met this woman who told me, she's leaving. I thought about this all day. I was very distressed about my cousin. I thought about this woman, that sentence, and those second words that I didn't understand. At least until that moment. In the afternoon, a while before leaving for work, I made the decision, don't ask me why, to take the day off. I played sick and stayed at home. I really slept poorly because in a way I blamed myself for what happened to my cousin. Although later I understood that often one cannot do anything against the will of another. And I learned to live with this anguish to this day. The next day I go to work, and I was shocked when they told me there had been a confrontation the previous night. And once again something curious happened. The patrol that responded to the call was the same one I would have been on if I hadn't reported in sick. One of the 2 officers was shot and died in Churuca Hospital a few hours later. I simply understood that somehow this woman we found on Branson Street knew something, saw something beyond. She told me about my cousin without even knowing him or me, and finally she knew in advance that if I went out that dawn, I was going to die in that confrontation. I didn't understand it then, and I still don't today. Maybe nothing is related, but it was also incredible that it's really impossible for me not to think about something. Could it have been my cousin who maybe wanted to protect me in some way before he left, as I did so much with him? As I told you at the beginning, they were 2 experiences that have nothing to do with each other, but they are very curious because of what happened. Could they have any logical explanation? I think so, but even so they have a halo of mystery that leaves us something. I think it leaves us that rich taste of the unexplainable, and to rethink beyond any belief that perhaps certain energies, whether bad or good, are there at all times and around us. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. I would love to know what you think about all this. See you in a few days with a new story, and as always, I send a big hug to everyone.